I'd like to ask you about how men parent differently in by and large, and how women parent differently by and large, as far as men roughhouse versus being a helicopter parent or things like that.
This is so important because let me bottom line it first. What I've found that when I did the research for the boy crisis is that what children need is not female style parenting or male style parenting alone. They need what I call checks and balance parenting. That both styles of parenting were invented by nature or by God or whoever you believe in for a reason. And that when children are deprived of either, there is major deprivation. The difference is that mostly women have schooled themselves and educated themselves on the value of protecting children, the value of nurturing children. And basically, it's just common sense that children need protection and nurturing. So it's very easy for anybody to get. What has not happened is we don't have parenting magazines talking about the value of roughhousing, the value of getting children out of their comfort zones, the value of when a child falls in the ski slope, getting them back up and having them do it again, the value of children going to the playground and being alone on that playground. And even if they get beaten up by a bunch of negatives on the playground, that how to make the best out of that and why that's an experience that is should not just be eliminated from the possibility of children's life. So we've had two things happen is the whole culture of helicopter parenting and the whole culture of the school systems being afraid, basically becoming more feminized, especially during recess time, by cutting back recess and also by making recess more and more protective. And so let's work on this one step at a time. The most important, I think, misunderstanding that I see among couples, including my own son-in-law and daughter with our grandchild, is the differences in almost intuitive, or maybe it's biological understanding of the value of roughhousing. My son-in-law just naturally takes Finlay, my grandson, and just roughhouses with him. I had to tell him to read the Boy Crisis book and understand how to dialogue with our daughter on this issue. And here is part of what the dialogue is about. The first thing that happens when a father and son, or a mother and a son or daughter do this, is there's a bond that is created from the roughhousing. It's like the bond, the excitement that you have when you go on a roller coaster. You go on that roller coaster because you know you're going to have excitement, but you also know you're going to have safety. And when an infant or a toddler roughhouses with his dad, he senses that there's safety, but he senses that there's lots of excitement happening. And when he's tossed up in the air, and then sometimes the dad catches him, and sometimes he lets him fall on the bed, and he knows that he's falling on the bed and not the floor. There is a type of trust that is built. There's a type of bonding that occurs that they can both take a risk together. The fun is enormous. Now, mom looks at the roughhousing and she says, "Oh my God, I feel like I just have one more child to monitor." And then the mom is really trying to bend over backwards and say, okay, I see my son or my daughter is having fun. Okay, try not to stop the fun. Let them go do what they want to. Trust Jim, that he will, husband, that he will know when to stop. And she says, "I just fear that sooner or later, somebody's going to get hurt. I guarantee it." Is she right? She is 100% or 99.9% likely to be right. And then she goes to level 2, which is, I feel guilty that I didn't intervene sooner and to protect my son or my daughter. And then she's astonished when he goes ahead and continues the roughhousing, because she says from her perspective, he should have learned his lesson. He's just fundamentally irresponsible because sooner or later they're going to hurt each other again. So what dad does not explain that is happening is, aside from the bonding, creates the ability on the part of the father to be able to say to the child, okay, no more roughhousing until you all get ready for bed. And getting ready for bed means do your chores, do your homework, get your teeth brushed, everything else that's required to be completely ready for bed. Your bedtime is 9:00. Whatever time you have free after you finish all those things, and I check your homework, by the way, then I'll spend time reading with you or roughhousing with you more, or doing whatever you want between then and 9. And mom goes, No, wait a minute. You just say roughhousing more just before you go to bed? You must be crazy. He would know nothing about parenting. And the father goes, just wait and see. And sure enough, the child is roughhoused. Also, they usually don't ask for roughhousing, but sometimes they do. Other times they ask for their favorite story to be read to them. But either way, the child falls asleep. The child's happy. The child's de-stressed. The child is very bonded with the family. The child therefore feels very secure. That's only the beginning of the process. What we also know is that, say those three children are roughhousing together. Let's say they're all on the couch and daddy's in horsey mode. And the children are sort of getting ready to jump onto daddy's back. And the job is to wrestle the dad to the ground and to see if they can win in the wrestling match. And so the older son, Jimmy, pushes Johnny and Jane out of the way. And dad goes, excuse me, here, wait a minute. You're not, you can try to get on there before Johnny and Jane, but you can't push them aside. You can't basically bully them. So you got to give them a fair chance. Well, what's a fair chance? And then daddy begins to sort of work with them as to, you can't do this and you can't do that. Now, the alternative is a lecture about being sensitive and empathetic to other people's perspectives. But instead of a lecture, dad is giving them the experience of when is too much, when is being assertive becoming aggressive? When is winning at the wrestling match being done without the consideration of the needs of your sister and the needs of your brother? And when is using your strength good, but when is using your strength bullying somebody else so that they don't have an equal chance? And all of these lessons are being learned. Why are they being learned? When they are not being done, dad is perfectly fine about saying, warning the child and then continuing the roughhousing. But then after the roughhousing continues, if that is violated again, dad's propensity is to say, end of roughhousing. We'll pick it up tomorrow night. Now, that last step is very pivotal because mom will be extremely sensitive to children's needs and children not bullying each other and pushing each other around as well. But oftentimes when the child does, mom will then repeat the statement about, I told you not to do this to your sister. I told you not to do this to your younger brother. And so then if they're in excitement mode, the children just sort of like say in the back of their mind, okay, which do I want more? More excitement and to win when I'm under emotional, sort of fun like this? Or do I want, if mom is just going to remind me to not have more excitement, I'll take that reminder that I'll ignore it and I'll continue on and have more excitement. So this is what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire. Emotional intelligence only tests itself when it's put under fire. And roughhousing puts it under fire. And roughhousing does not make the emotional intelligence a lecture and does not make it something that gets repeated, but rather puts it on the experiential level.
It's an experiential level where there is risk.
The value of this is that the father, by being willing to end the roughhousing, creates a consequence. It is not a huge consequence, but it's just enough to make the children stop doing the insensitive things to their brothers and sisters. Moms will tend to repeat themselves. And then moms will often say to me, I really feel kind of resentful that when the children hear dad say something, they just obey it. But when I say something, I have to repeat it over and over again without recognizing that the reason they have to repeat it over and over again is because they didn't establish the consequence instead of repeating it.
They didn't give affirmative discipline.
They didn't give affirmative discipline. And so oftentimes the dilemma that many moms find is that they repeat, and then they repeat again, and then they repeat again. Now they're feeling badly about themselves versus their dad because dads just say it one time. But in addition to that, eventually the child learns to keep manipulating its own way and ignoring. And finally the mother goes, I told you to, don't.
And she flips out.
And she flips out. Then she feels terribly about flipping out. So she bends over backwards to give the children a special treat or to apologize or so on. And the children, without recognizing they got the mother under their thumb.
Yeah.
And so the mother loses, the children lose, and then the dad, by not being able to roughhouse without being threatened, is also loses. And so, but the solution to this is to dads to do things like read about this in The Boy Crisis or some other good parenting book, and to lovingly explain this to the mom while listening to the mom's fears of it going too far. And then in the same way that Republicans and Democrats probably are best when they govern the nation together in checks and balance mode, to be in checks and balance mode with each other. But the being in checks and balance mode with each other never means the father going away and working 80 hours a week and coming back when he's exhausted and the children are in bed. You have to have time to do this, time to be involved, not just as a Disneyland dad as a visitor, not just on the weekends, but also as a rule. And the weekend visitation that is so frequent in this United States, aside from the word visitation being like a prison word, that is an enormous insult to men. Can you imagine calling women moms the visitors? Aside from that, it undermines fathering at its best. So, for example, a father maybe on a Sunday afternoon the kids say, "Can I go to the playground to play with some of the other kids?" And the father goes, "Okay, but be careful when you're there." And maybe the kid's a little bit young, like maybe 9 or 10. And then he picks up a game of basketball. And so maybe maybe a game is already going on. And he says, "Can I join the game?" And the game is with kids that are a little bit older. And the kids are sort of like mocking him and like, "Yeah, like, you're not old enough to really play well. And, what are you going to contribute here?" But he picks up those cues, but nevertheless, he wants to play and he does play. And so let's say worst case scenario, he gets, bullied around or pushed and stuff like that. And maybe he loses it and pushes back and maybe he gets beaten up. And then the father has to take him over an hour later back to the mom. What's the first thing the kid says to the mom? Even if if it isn't evidence that he's gotten beaten up, he cries or explains that he's gotten beaten up. So then mom inquires, and mom says, "Where was your dad?" "Oh, remember, it was the NFL game was on. He went back, dropped me off, went back to the NFL game. Mom is now 100% convinced that the father cares more about the NFL game than about protecting the kid. But dad doesn't explain to mom that from dad's perspective, what would have been best was that the child went to the playground, joined the pickup game or didn't, and came back to him after he did get beaten up or hurt and talked to him about, "Sweetie, what were the red flags that you saw?" "What do you mean red flags, Dad?" "Well, when was the first time you sort of began to worry that this was not the group that you really wanted to play with?" "Well, the first time was when they sort of laughed at me. The second time was when they were drinking. The third time was when they fouled me without apologizing and then laughed at me after that. This may take 20 minutes to get out of the boy with being defensive, but the father needs the time to process the negative experiences that a child has by taking risks, so that the child knows which risks to take and which risks not to take in the future. And if the child is just visiting father and goes from father back to mother, the mother goes to the psychologist and explains this, and then convinces the child that dad doesn't care. And so the child then interprets the next time that she or he is left off at the playground as not being cared for, as opposed to being cared for in a different way. The father giving the child the risks and then trusting that if he's involved afterwards, that he'll be able to process the failure with the child, so the child will become increasingly nuanced. Again, develop emotional intelligence under fire. But again, I don't blame moms on this, because moms cannot hear what dads don't say. And the next level of responsibility evolutionarily is for dads to start doing their homework about being good fathers and how to be a good father. And the culture needs to make the message very clear to men when they're boys, that your responsibility as an adult male, if you decide to have children, is to be a father warrior, WARRIOR, to overcome all the risks that society, the hazing that people will give you when you want to devote maybe full time to being a father, and that you have as much right to be a father full time as a mother has to be a mother full time, and that we're going to start training you for the process. in kindergarten, in first grade, in third grade, in different ways. I'm going to train you at home. So if you have a younger sister or younger brother, here's the way to feed them. Here's the way to change their diapers. Here, when a neighbor says, one of your daughters babysit, your response is, I have 3 children. 2 are daughters and 1 is a son. They can all babysit. In fact, Jimmy is really exceptionally good at really playing with the kids and giving them a lot of fun. I used to babysit as a kid, and I have to acknowledge I was just everybody on the block used to compete for me to babysit with them because I roughhoused with them, because I played with them. And the parents would look at me, and the father on the way out of the house, I'd already be roughhousing before they left, would be like, oh, this is great. The kids are having fun. The mother, I could see, would be a little bit jittery. But when they came back at the end of the evening and the next morning, they'd get these elated reports, and they'd feel like they had no option but to ask me to babysit again. And it was sort of that type of, that's what we need to help parents understand, is that the male is not the only good parent, but that the best parent is both parents. And here's the way to make that
And
happen.
here's why. So we talk about the tender years doctrine and debunking that tender years doctrine. Most individuals that promote like an 80-20, 27 days a month for a woman and 4 days for a man will invoke a tender years doctrine that basically says, oh, well, kids belong with moms. Do kids belong with moms?
Kids
Solely. I mean, do
Right,
kids
yes.
belong with moms solely?
Kids belong with moms, but not solely. Kids do worse at every age when they have only one parent. The research starts as early as before a regularly mature birth. So prematurely born children are more likely to develop their brains better and get out of the hospital sooner and have more psychomotor functioning, which is a high correlate to brain development. When the father is visiting the hospital and there as much as possible, the more they're there. This is research by Kyle Pruitt at Yale University on the even the prematurely born children. And then from the day the children are born in normal maturity on, and those first few years, the importance of the father being involved is enormous. So, for example, a father breathing on the child when it's first born helps the bonding process occur. It also changes the dad's brain. That is, the sooner the father gets involved with the child and the more he does, the more there's a whole nest of neurons in male brains that begin to develop, connect, and connect with each other. And then they have a mimicking of the, just like a woman has a motherhood instinct, this connection of all the neurons in a father's brain, the whole nest of neurons create the equivalent of a mother instinct. It's mostly overlapping with the mother instinct, but it also has different parts of that instinct. And so the father then becomes more involved because more oxytocin is developed, his testosterone level gets lower, and the neurons connect in such a way that he doesn't need outside sex chasing different women. He is thoroughly satisfied with the emotional intimacy of connecting with his own children. And so who benefits from that? The mother benefits from that, from the father. Instead of chasing around with another woman, he's desiring to come home as quickly as possible to play with the children. And the child benefits from that, female child or a male child. The accurate part of the tender years doctrine is that children desperately need parents in their tender years. The incorrect aspect of the tender year doctrine is that the time that the children most need their fathers is in the tender years.
On equal time, correct?
Yes. Yes.
I read a study, well, we're talking about boundary reinforcement, that men typically give a lot of boundary reinforcement, and that's a very positive outcome that leads to
Postponed gratification.
Which lead to success in life.
Right.
I found it interesting when I read this study, it talked about playgrounds, how playgrounds in the 70s and 80s seemed to have a lot of concrete. And they changed to recycled material playgrounds for rubber playgrounds. And ironically, the rubber playgrounds have a lot more injuries than the concrete playgrounds. And the construct inside of that was, when you're playing on a playground, if it's concrete and you fall, better not to take that risk.
Yes.
I saw an interesting correlation in an analogy for raising children like
Yes. So there's a lot of important truths in this. And this you see in the tension between mom and dad about risk taking, especially physical risk taking. So, example, on average, a child that says, Mom, can I climb the tree in the backyard? The mom will say, well, maybe, sweetie, in a few years you can. But right now you're too young to do that. You could fall and you could hurt yourself. And dad will tend to say, child of the same age, well, I guess so. You'll be careful, right? Yeah, I'll be careful. Okay, well, you go out and you be careful. Just climb the tree, but be careful. The kid says to the mother, Dad said I could climb the tree. And mom goes, oh, wait a minute, just a second. And dad and mom have a big argument. And the frequent result is something like this. Mom says he's too young to climb the tree, or she's too young to climb the tree. And dad said the children gain a lot. They'll be okay. He'll know not when not to go far. And mother says, you must be so naive. And who's right? They're both right. And so what ends up happening with checks and balance parenting, the mother and father negotiate a deal. And the mother says something like, okay, they can climb the tree, but they can't climb above this area. The child needs to know that not on this branch, which is too thin. And so the dad says, okay. No. Okay is not enough. Give me your cell phone and go out there and you be under the tree while that's happening. And so what's happened? The mother and father have negotiated a deal that allows the child to do the risk taking that occurs when she or he can climb the tree, but also allows the child to have a safety net so that in case she or he makes a mistake in the risk taking and falls, the father can be reasonably there to either cushion the fall or whatever. So what happens from that is that we now know that we didn't know before, is that child, every time she or he is taking the risk as to deciding what branch to climb on, what branch is too thin, what branch isn't, and how do I prove myself able to climb to the top of the tree in a way that can get my father and mother to approve of me doing that, and also climb higher than Jimmy or Jane can climb to prove that I'm better than Jimmy and Jane. Those are all the dynamics that are going on. And so the mother and father have to negotiate those dynamics. But what no one knows is that the more the child has to make all those decisions, the more effectively their brains, neurons connect, and the more they develop intelligence. Not just intelligence comes from a type of intelligence comes from risk taking that doesn't come when you have problems solved for you or you don't take those risks to begin with.
So when you have problems solved for you.
Yes.
So the issue of why you have so many boys failing in the teen years, you have so many boys in their 20s coming home, is that they were sheltered. They were sheltered from infancy, not to take risks.
Yes.
Not to push forward.
Yes. One of the worst things we can do for our children is for our boys on the one hand to say, you will be a hero and you'll be wonderful. You become a Marine like your dad. That's pushing the child to the risk of having disposability aligned with being praised. But the other side of that coin is the opposite of saying, I don't want you to take this risk here because you might hurt yourself. Yes, the children will hurt themselves when they take a lot of risks, when they're roughhousing, when they climb a tree, and they will learn what risks are worth taking, what risks aren't. And their brain will keep developing to make them less and less stressed when they face a risk-taking situation, because they've gotten more and more nuanced and well-developed skills as to how to take those risks, when to back off and when not.
We're no longer looking at a world where we want our kids to go to war and die at 25. We want our children to make 80, 90, 100. And we currently are not doing that construct.
Yes.
We're pushing for disposability and we're pushing for single parenting.
Yes.
When I read The Boy Crisis, it's very clear in chapter 17 that single parenting has terrible life outcomes, that intact families have great outcomes in general, and 50-50 maximum parental involvements have great outcomes. Can you talk to me about that? Also talk to me about step parenthood and versus bio dad, etc.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we do need to know that children do best when raised by both parents. So let's be really tough about this now.
Does that mean equal time?
That means equal time because when fathers have only a small percentage of the time, a lot of the contributions that dads make cannot be taken advantage of. I was talking a little while ago about the child that comes home from the playground and gets into a fight. That fight becomes an experience that the child can grow from to learn when to watch, when are the red flags of danger that you need to pay attention to. And so something that's negative can be turned into a positive by a parenting that isn't just likely to say, well, from now on you don't go to the playground, or from now on you can only go when I'm free to stay there, and watch you and protect you, but rather that trust the child to increase his or her skill sets to know when risk taking is going too far and when to take the risks. And so that's one of the contributions of father involvement, but it can't be done in a minimal amount of time because the child has to build trust. The child has to be able to talk about these things at night. So where boys in particular are most likely to express their feelings is at bedtime when they're about ready to get a story read to them. And a story is read to them. And then something in the story reminds them of something that happened during the day that they're hurt about or feel bullied about or feel sad about. And they feel in that quiet time, they feel the invitation to open up and to speak up about dad. And then they know that they can speak to their dad and get a different response from their dad than their mom. Their mom is more likely to listen empathetically and maybe to warn them against repeating that type of experience. The dad is more likely to sort of listen empathetically for a while and then say to them, what could you have done differently? And so on. Both are important contributions to a child's development, but they need both. And that happens only when there's about 50-50 time where the bonding has a chance to take place. The highest correlates for girls and close to the highest correlate for boys in terms of psychological health is having hangout time with dads. Studies done at the University of California at Irvine by Hayward have shown that that girls that hang out with dads have an increase in emotional security and psychological security that outpaces any other correlate that they were able to measure. Boys also benefit extraordinarily from that. So, for example, a boy, we pick up, let's say a mother or father picks up a boy from a soccer game and said, how's the game? The kid's likely to say, if it's a boy, yeah, all right, I'm fine. And then, sweetie, is anything bothering you? No, I'm fine. So then with hangout time later, as maybe the kid's doing homework or watching something on TV and the father's around at the same level of the house, and they both walk into the kitchen and they get something out of the refrigerator. In the process of getting something out of the refrigerator, the boy says, yeah, Dad, if a coach, if you played goalie last week and the coach said you were doing really well, but this week he didn't let me be the coach again. I mean, he didn't let me be the goalie again. What's that about? Why would he ever say I was doing well and then not let me be the goalie again this week? And then that comes out when there's hangout time, when there's enough emotional security for the child to ask that question off the cuff. And the child could ask that question of the mother. Could he? Yes. But he'd be almost guaranteed that the mother would give an empathetic response. Whereas the child with the father may feel that there's some empathy, but in addition to the empathy, the father might give him an honest answer, like maybe he wanted to give another boy a chance, or maybe he didn't feel you did play as well. Maybe you should ask him what you could have done differently to make it better. There'd be more probing like that from the father, chances are, which the mother might feel was insensitive to the child's feelings. That's what comes out in hangout time. And hangout time comes when the father has plenty of time to have an experience of emotional security where the child feels comfortable enough not just to be asked to express his or her feelings off the cuff, which boys do not do very often. And if they do it, it's usually because of being overprotected. And so that's an example of the value of equal time. So to understand why ADHD is about 30% level among children raised by single moms and 15% among children raised predominantly by dads, we really have to dig back. But the digging back is a worthwhile digging because it really teaches you a great deal about what dads do that are so important. And understand, if you're a single mom, a lot of these things are not proprietary to single dads. Dads are likely to do these things. Everything I'm mentioning, you can learn to do as well. And so this is available to you.
Right.
So, okay. But here's a typical dynamic between dads and moms, particularly after divorce. A dad and mom do exactly the same boundary setting. So what I'm going to be dealing with now is the difference between boundary setting versus boundary enforcement. Dads and moms are both likely to set boundaries the same way. Sweetie, you can have your ice cream as soon as you finish your peas. Dad and mom will both say that to the children. In a divorce situations specifically, and in life in general, the children will test the boundaries for both with father and mother. And the difference is in the way the father and mother respond to the testing of the boundaries. So that mom is much more likely to say, in her mind's eye, okay, we've had a tough day here. I only have a few precious moments with my son or my daughter. My son is saying she or he would like to have ice cream without finishing the peas. So I'll tell you what, I'll work as hard as I can on this now. And I will say, sweetie, you have to have a couple more peas before you finish your ice cream. The child has a few more peas and then gets the ice cream. So with mom, the child learns I can manipulate a better deal. With dad, it's much more likely to look at the child and say, excuse me, you've asked for having ice cream before you finish your peas. We had a deal here. And the deal is you can have your ice cream, but you must finish your peas, not try to negotiate a better deal than we just agreed to. And the child goes, oh, you're so mean. And dad goes, well, you can continue to cry and say I'm so mean, and then there'll be no ice cream tomorrow night either.
Right.
And the child eventually learns, like, shoot, with my dad, I've got to learn to finish my task, finish doing what I need to do. Metaphor for finishing peas is being what I need to do in order to get what I want to get, had the ice cream. So the child learns to focus on the task of finishing the peas. That is, its attention is focused. With mom, the attention deficit is allowed to set in because the child, instead of focusing on finishing the peas, is allowed to think of other things like, how can I manipulate a better deal? And if in a divorce situation, let's say, and feeling guilty about the divorce, the mom is saying in her mind's eye, I don't want to get into a fight about a few peas when Billy or Jane has just been bullied at school, or they feel depressed about not doing well in the math test, or they know that I'm feeling a little bit down. I want to take these precious moments and I want to work out a compromise with my kids. But the kids learn to say, aha, where is the vulnerable area that I can present about myself? How can I present myself as enough of a victim to get mom's sympathy to be able to have to eat fewer peas to get the ice cream? Nobody is badly intended here. Everybody wants the best thing for their child. But the child with the mother learns to manipulate that better deal. The child with the father learns that manipulating that better deal is fruitless, and it's only going to get me less of what I want. Therefore, I better pay attention focus rather than attention deficit. Now is the big stuff, which is the slippery slope that leads to. With that attention deficit, the child has not learned postponed gratification. Postponed gratification is the single most important predictor of a child doing well in life, success-wise, versus a child doing poorly. Now, we often try to say, well, what does success mean? Well, here's the way that translates. The child who does not feel able to postpone gratification goes to school, and no matter what success means to him or her, if it means finishing homework, if it means doing well at basketball or in a sports event, if it means reciting perfecting skills to become an Olympic star or a good pianist or a good violinist. No matter what your purpose is, no matter what your dream is, you are less able to fulfill it if you have postponed gratification. You get started on your homework and a text comes in and you have to respond to the text. You get distracted and you don't have the postponed gratification. The end result of not having that postponed gratification is you start feeling worse about yourself. Especially boys tend to feel worse about themselves. That leads to depression, that leads to alienation, that leads to a greater likelihood of being addicted to people outside of your friendship network because you don't have a friendship network of respect. And that tends to lead to not only depression, but in worst case scenarios, suicide, and in worst case scenarios, such anger at the schools that it's a potential setup for school shootings.